Let's dial back the clock to the Conference on the Future of Europe in 2022, where citizens across the continent delivered a clear mandate to the EU. Scrap the veto vote, amplify the Parliament's power for a more democratic EU, and unify under a single EU president. In fact, with 49 proposals on the table, EU citizens sent a very clear message to our leaders. The EU must change. Fueled by this mandate, the European Parliament got down to business, drafting an ambitious list of reforms. On the screen you can see a summary of the proposed reforms, and if you want a detailed explanation, go to our first episode linked above. These reforms are particularly crucial given the increasing number of countries aspiring to join the EU. Imagine a union with 35 or more members. Without some of these reforms, the EU in its existing structure might face operational challenges, making it unworkable. The EU Parliament thought so too, and on November the 22nd last year, the Parliament voted yes to the reform proposals, a significant step forward to a potential convention. A convention, you ask? Well, this is a massive gathering of representatives from the EU governments, national parliaments, the European Parliament, and the European Commission, where treaty reform is discussed and negotiated. After they reach an agreement, each country in the EU has to officially approve these changes. And then at the very end, we have a new treaty, a bit like a constitution for the European Union. So when will we have a convention? Well, there's a final hurdle, the European Council. To start a convention for treaty change, we need a simple majority from the 27 heads of the EU. This means that at least 14 must signal their approval. But scheduled discussions in December turned into a waiting game that stretched into the new year. And now, a quarter into the year, we're still waiting. But there was actually a European Council meeting on March the 23rd, where the topic was discussed. And the latest official text states, and I quote, "The European Council will address internal reforms at an upcoming meeting with a view to adopting by summer 2024 conclusions on a roadmap for future work." Brilliant. That pretty much means no update. But when reading in between the lines, there seems to be division among the leaders. Had there been a consensus, we might have already witnessed the unveiling of a detailed plan, or even better, a decisive vote on the matter. Ursula von der Leyen from the European Commission is also getting involved, releasing an official document to the European Council. The document suggests that the EU can reform within the framework of the current treaties, meaning there's no need for a convention. Basically, a shortcut to EU reform. To be more specific, the document says, while the Commission has indicated its support to treaty change, if and where it is needed, it believes that the EU's governance can be swiftly improved by using the full potential of the current treaties. But is this correct though? Can we make the aforementioned reforms without changing the EU treaties? To answer this very question, we partnered with the Union of European Federalists, today's sponsor, who have helped us go through the European treaties to find out what is actually possible. Established in 1946, the Union of European Federalists has been a steadfast advocate for a European federation. UEF is a cross-border, non-governmental political collective of dedicated individuals fervently working towards the vision of a European federation. We recommend you check them out, as they have some very interesting perspectives on the future of the EU. See their details in the description below. Now, the EU has 4 mechanisms to make changes to its current structures and policies. Yes, it is a bit technical, but bear with us, we're gonna do our brand justice and make it simple. The first mechanism refers to treaty change, which we discussed before. This method allows for broad changes to the EU's foundational treaties. It's the most versatile tool, capable of implementing all the reforms the Parliament might want. This is why it's highly favored by the Parliament, earning a checkmark for being able to address every reform area mentioned. It is also the only mechanism that requires a convention. Then there's a second mechanism, referred to as simplified revision procedure, which allows for limited adjustments. It offers a way to make minor adjustments to the EU's internal policies without adding new powers or altering the distribution of powers between the EU and its member countries. For example, the creation of the European Stability Mechanism in 2012, a fund designed to help Eurozone countries in financial trouble. However, this mechanism is really limited in scope and can't tackle big issues like foreign policy, defense, or EU funding structures. Essentially, it falls short in all the major reform areas that we've discussed. This brings us to the third mechanism, known as the passarelle clause, the favorite tool of von der Leyen. This clause allows the Council of the European Union to shift from unanimous voting to qualified majority voting in certain areas. This sounds promising, right? So let's tentatively assign check marks to the 3 areas where there are currently vetoes. However, right off the bat, this mechanism does not apply to military and defense, so we have to remove the check mark there. Also, the mechanism's impact on foreign policy is actually quite minimal. Let us explain why. The European Council and the Council of the European Union are the 2 main bodies with veto power. The former consists of 27 heads of state, and the latter comprises of ministers from the 27 member states. The passarelle clause allows the European Council to enable qualified majority voting in the Council of the European Union by removing the requirement of unanimous consent. Think of it this way: the 27 heads of state agree that their ministers can take qualified majority voting decisions instead of the usual unanimous voting. However, the irony is that the bulk of foreign policy decisions are actually made within the European Council, where the passarelle clause's ability to shift from unanimous voting to qualified majority voting does not apply. So, to simplify all of this, with the passarelle clause, can the veto on foreign policy be lifted? No, at least only in a very limited capacity. Lastly, the passarelle clause also cannot be used to modify the decision of EU resources, which still have to be decided by unanimity. So that's another limited for fiscal policy. And in all the other reform areas, you ask? Well, no. The much hyped passarelle clause cannot change any of them. Some suggest a 4th mechanism for EU reform, which deals with Article 49, typically used for EU accession. The idea is that the negotiations for new country memberships could serve as an opportunity for broader EU treaty revision. But this is simply not the article's purpose. Adjustments are aimed solely at integrating new members without reshaping the EU's foundational structures or principles. We've looked into this treaty, and it's really a no-go for any of these proposed reforms. At EU Made Simple, we think there's no other option than treaty reform. The Commission's fantasy of using the passarelle clause is very distracting and falls short of what is really needed. We need to be more ambitious and enhance the EU's democracy, streamline the EU's decision-making processes, and improve the EU's capacity to address global challenges. And the only thing that can do that is treaty reform. Even if you do not agree with all of these changes, let's at least talk about them in a convention, which is also much more democratic than all the other options we discussed in the video today. So, no, Ursula, your idea is simply not good enough, and we really hope that the European Council in June will vote in favor of treaty reform and not opt for unviable alternatives. So what can you do? To voice your support or opposition to EU treaty change, exploring the European Parliament's voting record is a powerful way to start. Here you can see how the political groups voted for the Parliament's proposal to amend the treaties. I think it's self-explanatory, but very quickly, green shows the percentage of MEPs within that political group that voted for the proposal to amend the treaties, red is against, and white shows the percentage of MEPs that abstained. So, quite surprising actually, the most pro-treaty reform were the Greens/EFA, followed by the S&D, and then Renew Europe. The ECR and IND, on the other hand, are the most against. So keep that in mind when you go to the polls in June. But we'll be keeping a close eye on these developments, and a part 4 of the series will follow in June. And of course, many more in case of a convention. So subscribe to stay informed, and check out the first video, linked above, for a more detailed explanation of the reform proposal. A big thank you to our sponsor, the Union of European Federalists. And thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please consider signing up to Patreon. Your help means the world to us. Until next time.